This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
What if you had such a clear understanding of your own DNA and genetic makeup that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with the specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the power and capability to purchase products that best align to your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA collection kit and Endo Decoded report at endodna.com/product and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/product and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. In this episode of Cannabinoid Connect, I'm talking with Milan Patel. He's the co-founder and CEO at PathogenDx. Mr. Patel leads the strategic vision, financial health, and global growth of PathogenDx, which is a Scottsdale, Arizona-based company that provides disruptive DNA-based pathogen testing technology and solutions for the cannabis, botanical, food, and agricultural industries. During our conversation, we discussed the importance of pathogen testing in the cannabis space. We talk about PathogenDx's involvement in the food and agricultural industries. We talk about PathogenDx's QuantX total yeast and mold test. Last, we discuss how PathogenDx successfully pivoted to COVID testing during the height of the pandemic. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Cannabinoid Connect as you watch or listen to my conversation with Milan Patel, the co-founder and CEO at PathogenDx. Hello, Milan. How are you?
Doing well, Kevin. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for making time for me in the audience today. Really excited to be talking to you about, your role within PathogenDx, which of course is you're the co-founder and CEO, and the disruptive technology that PathogenDx really presents when it comes to pathogen testing within the cannabis and hemp industries. But before we do that, for those listening and who are maybe unfamiliar with pathogen testing, let's just kind of talk about the importance of it, right? Like, why is this needed, and what role that'll kind of kick off what role PathogenDx plays in the space?
No, it's a great question, and thank you for starting it off that way. The importance of pathogen testing in the cannabis and hemp sector is basically driven by bacteria, fungus, and viruses that wind up on anything that you grow or when you make into a product. So I'll give you a classic example. In the case of any kind of flower product that's grown in an internal grow or an external grow, you effectively it's grown in soil, and soil has a lot of bacteria and has a lot of mold and fungus already. So it has a propensity to actually grow on the actual finished product, and especially if you don't grow it in a controlled environment. And what I mean by that is, for example, controlled temperature, controlled humidity, light, moisture, and these things basically have a huge impact on whether you have a certain type of bacterial pathogen such as E. coli or Salmonella, or a fungal pathogen such as Aspergillus. And the reason why these are important is in the origins of the cannabis sector, the basis of that particular plant has medicinal value. So it's got some therapeutic value, it's got some healing power. And so, for example, an immunocompromised patient or a consumer that could be a cancer patient may be consuming medicinal marijuana for pain management, for neuropathy. So in that particular case, if there's a pathogen such as a bacterial pathogen or a fungal pathogen, if they wind up in their body because their immune system is compressed, it has a huge impact on on a life or death situation. So the importance of why pathogens and pathogen testing in cannabis is key is all related to what are called human health pathogens such as E. coli, Salmonella, and Aspergillus, as well as plant pathogens such as powdery mildew, Botrytis, Fusarium. In other words, the pathogens that impact the health of the plant. And so a lot of this is stemmed up. A lot of this is stemmed on having to test for these type of microbes. They call it microbial testing, pathogen testing on the actual product itself before it is consumed by a patient or a consumer.
That totally makes sense. And I love the way that you succinctly kind of put that in layman's terms, for those that are just kind of curious or interested about what all this means. And so I guess just kind of a side question, regarding your background, is this something that you kind of saw an opportunity within the space in? I think from what I gathered from some of your background online, you were a previous investor, or you were an investor within the parent company. And then did you kind of gravitate to this idea because you saw something here? I mean, how did that all start?
That's a brilliant question and a great question to start ask actually. And so yes, I was a investor to the parent company of PathogenDx, but I felt that the company wasn't focused on a big enough market. And specifically, what I did was, as the sort of key investor to the parent company, I licensed out the technology with the chief scientific officer or the inventor of the actual technology that we use in almost 110 cannabis testing labs nationally now. And I realized that at that point, and this was in 2014, Kevin, that it just seemed to me that, for example, our food supply system, our water system, our environmental, and even us as humans were getting bombarded. We were at war with pathogens. We were at war with bacteria, with fungal organisms, and with even viruses. And I said, this is a part of the world that doesn't seem to be, reducing, meaning it wasn't like these outbreaks were becoming less and less. In the case of the food industry, the food safety industry has over 1,800 foodborne outbreaks nationally. So it tells you, so I sort of realized at that point that, with the cannabis sector, we had to sort of, think about, addressing a market that wouldn't necessarily would learn from the mistakes of other industries and the best practices of those industries, but not make the same mistakes over again. And so what I said is, fine, let's focus on a company that can focus just purely on purifying, having purified, clean, safe product to the marketplace. And that doesn't mean that the other markets aren't doing it. It's just that the methodology and the technologies they're using have run out of gas, basically have run out of the headroom in the ceiling of working to purify the product to that next level where, you and I can consume it without any kind of, safety or health implication to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good segue. I mean, because I was saving that question for later, but since you touched on it, let's just kind of get right into that. And that is like, so I saw a lot on the website and reading about PathogenDx and how really your differentiator is this quote unquote disruptive technology or kind of differentiated methodology. So when you talk about some of the lab tests out there, or what we're currently doing kind of hit the ceiling, what is y'all's differentiator? I mean, what is this disruptive technology that you talk about?
Yeah. And so to answer that question, it's really around the way you test. And I want you to think about it this way. There are a lot of, it's not just like, we're not just testing for one pathogen in cannabis. We're testing in some cases like California, like Salmonella and 2 different E. coli, pathogenic E. coli strains, and 4 different Aspergillus species, which are 7 pathogens in 1 gram of, for example, flour. That the way that current or conventional testing technology work is like the classic Petri dish, Julius Petri. You'd have to test one of those organisms one at a time. So that's called single plex testing. So you have to have 7 Petri dishes for every 1 gram of flour that you are pulling from a cultivator that goes through a chain of custody to a cannabis testing lab. That's the old way of doing things. it's called plate culture, it's petri dish, and it just takes days. It takes like 3, 5, 7 days before you get a result, where a microbiologist has to look underneath the microscope and then count the number of colonies. So it's like a very old-fashioned Adam Smith model. What we've done is we've developed a technology basically called a microarray that can test for all 7 of those pathogens in a single test within a matter of few hours. So one's molecular, meaning you're actually going into the DNA and you're able to identify that Salmonella DNA, the E. coli DNA, all in the same sample within 6 hours. And so it's like your multiplex testing, meaning you're testing all of them in one sample in less than a shift's time, versus taking 3, 5, 7 days before you get an answer. And with a high value crop, such as cannabis and even hemp for that matter, you want to be able to get the answer sooner. And the important point here is that the microbial test or the pathogen test is the test that takes the longest amount of time in cannabis testing labs. And the rest of the test is just you're just waiting for the results of this particular test before the product can be released to the dispensaries or the retailers, and then it be sold to the consumer and the patient. And so that's the level of disruption the PathogenDx technology has created. It's called a microarray. It allows you to test for as many pathogens. In fact, one of our tests can do 50 different pathogens in one test. And that's an environmental test for all cultivators. So a cultivator can swab surfaces, drains, vents, as well as capture it in the air, and within 6 hours know exactly the profile, the pathogenic profile of what's in the air in the cultivation facility, or whatever that person may have swabbed in terms of the surfaces.
Yeah, I mean, the differentiator that you mentioned is pretty impressive, right? I mean, 6 hours compared to 5 to 7 days, like you mentioned. So I get the value proposition around the turnaround time. And this multiplex microarray methodology that you mentioned, and compared to the petri dish, methodology, is that like really, really unique to what y'all do? I mean, what would you say the percentage of the industry right now, still does the petri dish methodology compared to what you were talking about, microarray?
Yeah, brilliant question. I think about 30% of the industry still runs petri dish, and so that's a large percentage of the industry. Still sort of waiting for a result, where you're waiting for things to grow rather than just going into the sample and identifying that particular pathogen through the DNA approach. And so that's a significant portion of the industry for such a high value crop. And in fact, in some cases, when you have powdery mildew or you have a plant pathogen, does a grower want to wait 3, 5, 7 days before they find out the result that their crop is getting eradicated with a plant pathogen that could have a huge impact on the economic loss for a cultivator? So that's the value and the benefit we provide in terms of accuracy and turnaround time.
Yeah, I mean, time is money. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And then, so you talked about, kind of the importance of having pathogen testing within the cannabis and hemp space, right? As this industry continues to emerge and grow. And so, but I also know that PathogenDx also has some involvement within the food and agricultural industries as well. Do you want to touch on some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the reason why we look at our company as a sort of a platform diagnostics company, and what that means is our single mission in life is to address pathogens in food, agricultural, water, environment, and humans. And so, if you're looking for salmonella in for example an edible or even a flower in cannabis, you're still looking for salmonella in chicken, for example, and you will have salmonella even in water in some cases. And so our approach is that we create a building block, basically a building block approach to developing these tests, and we can quickly apply them to these other industries. So in the case of the food industry, we have the ability to do the same thing by compressing the time that the food industry is taking today to test for salmonella or listeria monocytogenes. These are killers in the food industries, just as E. coli was for Chipotle, or you have Campylobacter. And so what we're doing is we're able to test for the same bugs in poultry meat, for example, or in produce, leafy greens such as, romaine. Remember the romaine outbreak 2-3 years ago? Same kind of thing, as well as in terms of beef. So it's sort of the same core technology, but the starting material is not necessarily cannabis related, but food related. And so that's our approach, is to basically create these sort of the classic example is the microarray is still the core template by which any food, cannabis, environmental, or even clinical diagnostics lab can test, using, but then the starting material is different,
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, switching back to, testing within the cannabis and hemp space, I'm curious, talk to me a little bit about the markets that you serve, particularly like, you touched on California. And from my understanding, I know that they have a pretty rigorous, testing process, right? When it comes to the number of pathogens you need to test for, and microbials and, mycotoxins and this, that, and the other. So talk to me about California and maybe how that's different compared to some of the other adult use states that you're in.
I think California by far, and a really good question is, they really did lean on their skis and stick their neck out as being the first state that started to really, embrace more rigorous testing requirements, especially for microbes or pathogens. They asked for 6 or 7 pathogens all in a single sample. And so before that, when you look at Colorado, they really only had, at that point in time, salmonella, E. coli, and total yeast and mold. They weren't even testing for the fungal pathogens, but I think that's about to change. And Washington was just really E. coli, salmonella, and a class indicator test called bile tolerant gram negative. So when California, stuck a stake in the ground, they're creating ultimately, what California established as this regulations will ultimately seem like it's shaping out to be more at a national level. A lot of the other states like Michigan, Florida, Oklahoma, Illinois, New York and Maryland, they're starting to follow suit to what California established initially. So I think it's a very progressive state in terms of regulations, and sometimes that's good for consumer safety and the benefit for us. It's the right thing to do, and sometimes in many cases industry may have a difficult time with that level of rigor, right? But California, doesn't matter if it's cannabis or hemp, if it's automotive emissions industry, they take a leadership position on that front. So I think that what they have shaped out to do in terms of regulations overall, as well as pathogen testing in cannabis, is ultimately likely to shape out at the federal level when the industry ultimately federalizes to that point.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree with you on that. Federal legalization is inevitable. We don't know when it's going to happen, but some of the pushback, I guess, right now from some of the rigorous, testing and regulatory compliance is that there's a black market as well, right? There's an illicit market. And with the federal prohibition kind of still in place, there's this weird kind of moment that everybody's in where we all want to be operating the right way and, having these products at the highest standards, but there's always those bad actors, right? And there's always kind of the illicit market that's currently thriving because of that. So I agree with you until the,
to add to that, I think, Kevin, I think that's the part where you either got your foot in or you got your foot out, right? And so we're in this sort of, gray zone. But I think you're right. I think once it becomes, once it gets decriminalized and it's no longer considered a narcotic controlled substance, I do think that the likes of the FDA, the USDA, even the EPA and OSHA will all come in. And I think for us is we need to get ready when that moment happens. It could be, who knows when it's going to be. We know that at some point it will, with the way the industry is growing, and the number of states that have literally signed up for this, right, on every ballot, right? It's not, there's hardly been any sort of quote unquote failures across the number of states. Most states, there's 38 states now in terms of medicinal marijuana, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying to you is that we as an industry need to think through and look at like what's happening with the pharmaceutical company under regulations with the FDA. What are they being asked to do, and what should we be learning to know that when we need to prepare for that mindset? Because the mindset for human change is more difficult than the actual change itself. What I'm saying to you is certain things like CGMP, good manufacturing practices. If you're a cultivator and you're growing medicinal marijuana, and tomorrow it was federalized, what do we think that the FDA is going to ask us to do? They're going to ask us to do the same thing that they've asked the pharmaceutical industry to do. So are we ready for it, or what do we need to do to get ready for it? Right.
Right.
That's the thing.
No, that's very well said. I totally, I couldn't agree more with you. I agree. And, I just wanted to clarify, I was looking as you were talking, it's 30, just so that we're, fact checkers, it's 35 states that are medicinal
35,
and 18 that have gone adult use. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. And, it's all about, I always kind of push the notion of education as well, right? And talking about this stuff as well, because, some of the states that aren't online right now kind of don't know what to look out for when it comes to implementing policies that talk about regulation and, upholding high standards when it comes to product development and production. And so it's important that we have these discussions,
I think so. Yeah. And you brought up the good thing. You talked about enforcement. So in the world of enforcement, the states may be a little bit more lenient, and they probably have been when the initial evolutionary cycles, whether it was Colorado or California or even Washington or whichever state has passed ballots to be legalized at the state level. But when it comes to the FDA, the FBI agents will come in. And that's the difference, is that there's a completely different level of rigor. And why I say this is because we at Pathogen in the last 12, 18 months pivoted also into COVID testing. So
I was gonna ask you about that. I was like, we're talking about bacteria and pathogens. I was like, I would imagine that y'all played a part during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, we do, and that's a nice segue. So what we learned is we have an FDA EUA authorized product, and I can't tell you the level of lift, that we had to go through to get that regulatory authorization from the FDA for our testing COVID. And they actually require us to be, ISO 13485, or, basically a level of oversight where they reach through into your supply chain to make sure that the quality of your suppliers meet up to the standard for a medical device, for example. And it would be sort of the same thing for us in the medical marijuana world, where when you're actually making medicine, because that's what it would be considered under a federal model, they're going to reach through not just into the cultivator, they'll reach through straight into the supply chain. Who's supplying your soil? Who's supplying the water? How are you monitoring and controlling that environment? How often are you taking data of that stuff? So think about the amount of just regulatory lift that's required for the industry. And I'm not saying natural human nature is to push back, but if that's the trajectory and that we're heading in, we're going to need to be as sort of the sector need to get ready for that.
That's right. It's coming, right? It's not a matter if, it's a matter of when. And the more that operators, businesses, everyone alike can do the right thing and follow, as best they can, the regulation that's been in place or that is not in place, but they know it should be in place, it's only going to help them, because those that don't are either going to need to play catch up or going to be weeded out, right? I mean,
yeah. And there's a lot of resources out there. That's what we learned out of the COVID question that you were bringing, that there's so much to learn from these other industries and what makes sense to do in baby steps, right? In steps that make sense, because everybody pushes back, like, oh my gosh, I got to do something that that requires this much effort in terms of FDA versus this much in terms of the state level, well, one should get educated between the gap. And that's education. And sometimes that education is almost free. It's not telling you to implement now, but it tells us as sort of this, the cannabis and the hemp sector has so much resources to be able to go to those and understand what would need to happen in a stair-step fashion to ultimately get there, so that the plant ultimately wins, right? That's the whole point, was that this industry was founded on on the fact that there's some medicinal, there's some therapeutic value to the plant. And so it's not a narcotic in the sense that you get stuck on addicted to a drug. That's not the point. The point is, how do you make it safe enough that people who want to consume it are get the enriched value therapeutically, meaning medically, as well as make sure it's safe to consume, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I can totally tell that that's, PathogenDX's really mantra, and that is, making sure that what we are consuming when it comes to cannabis products is safe, and doesn't include the bacteria and the various pathogens that we've talked about today. So I've really enjoyed our conversation, Milan. Is there anything that you want to close with as we wrap up here?
I think I appreciate the time you've given me. I think that overall this year has been, I think it can be a very pivotal year, knowing that, okay, there's a change in administration, right? There's this inertia with the number of states that are now getting involved with, what I want to share is, compared to 5 years ago, when you would openly talk about, well, we're doing testing or we're developing testing technology for the cannabis industry, somebody would sort of look the other way, because it had a black cloud over it, right? This time around, it's not so much a black cloud. People are like, okay, they're more accepting that there's a large enough industry that there's people have embraced it. The mass population in most states have accepted that as being a credible industry. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's a completely different type of response we're getting, as opposed to what it was several years ago. And I think we got to learn from some of these mistakes, like the vape pen crisis, to not fall into that trough again. And so I think we're at this inflection point in the sector that we could really break away with the right mindset, where we could explode, and we can because there's a lot of sophisticated money. There's regulations now. It's got significant mass. There's both medicinal value as well as adult use value. And so the point I'm trying to make is that I think we're at a turning point before it gets federalized, to really sort of separate ourselves from other industries and do a better job, and not trip over again and the same playing over again in terms of outbreaks or large industry level issues or crises, if you get my point.
Yeah, I do. No, and it's so funny you say that, because it's a reoccurring theme on this podcast with, it doesn't matter whatever expert or industry leader that I have on, and I talk about whatever discipline they sit in within the industry. It's like they're all saying the same thing. Like we're at this pivotal moment where now's our chance, our opportunity to do it differently than what existing industries have done, right? And that is so true in every aspect, every facet of this
the other thing I wanted to tell you, Kevin, is that share with you, is I felt like we've been in the industry 6 years. It's nothing, right? I mean, seriously, right? And so, but the innovation cycles, unprecedented. The number of innovation cycles in the industry is mind-blowing. And so what I'm saying is that I felt like even the last 6 years, since 2014, we had so many lab owners wanting to, participate in doing the right thing for the industry, getting the best technology out, applying, what it was previously a cottage industry, the learnings, right? And that innovation cycle has been phenomenal. And we don't want to lose that, right? Of course, big business is coming in. We get that, but that's the beauty of it. And that's why I think it's accelerated so well. It's done so well. And I think there's a great sort of cohesiveness around the industry because people believe in it, right? People believe that it's not just a plant and it's not just a dollar. There's a real purpose to it besides, the alternative of having pharmaceutical products out there in the marketplace, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, dependency on certain
Yeah.
medications and whatnot. I mean, it's just a way out. It's an alternative way of living an improved life, right? A more fulfilled life for some people, for most people. I wouldn't say for all, right? But everything you said, I couldn't agree with more, Milan. And again, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights and sharing more information about your company, PathogenDx. And speaking of, where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more?
Well, we're already on in the internet at www.pathogendx.com. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. If you look up LinkedIn, that's where we're mostly present. I think there's less of a presence in Facebook and Instagram, but we are on those. And so yeah, it's we're on most of these conferences, and we'll be at MJ BizCon next week. Just stop by our booth. We'd love to talk to you. We love to talk about pathogens, and and eliminating them, not letting them explode like what we've experienced. For nobody wants to be stuck in our homes, which we both are at the present time. But the bottom line is, the 18 months tells you that we are at war with viruses, bacteria, and fungal organisms, and we have to do a better job. So I think, I'm thankful for the industry, thankful for our labs that are being our customers who stuck beside us, because the reality on the ground, Kevin, is that at the end of the day, this technology would not have seen the daylight if it wasn't for those people that gave us a chance. The industry gave us a chance, and we are now got AOAC certified products as well as FDA authorized products on the clinical and human diagnostic side. And so, I'm very thankful for that. So
That's great. Well, thank you again for sharing that, Milan. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're living in a new time now, and this pathogens, bacteria, anything that's kind of a viral fungi that's it's upon us, it's top of mind, and it's important that we address it in new, innovative ways, and that's what I'm hearing that Pathogen DX is doing. So y'all keep blazing the trails, and I look forward to following y'all's progress as the industry continues to grow and mature.
thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this podcast, and let's keep in touch. Look forward to seeing you again.
Sounds good. Yes. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.